Dr. Susan Schwartz, I'm so delighted to meet you. How are you?
I'm good. Thank you very much. I'm delighted to have been asked. Thank you.
First of all, it's a late night there in the US, and we're broadcasting from Israel. So it's a good night to you and good morning for all of our audience, and people will probably see it later. And we're here to talk about your newest book. You wrote many things and many articles before, and this is the new book. And I think that I have so many questions that I was thinking about while reading the summary. But I'll start maybe with something that took me to Platt's poem, the part of which says, "If I've killed one man, I've killed two. The vampire who said he was you, and drank my blood for a year, 7 years. If you want to know, Daddy, you can lie back now." And it drew me to the poem, and your book is upon the absent father effect on daughters.
Yes.
What brought you to this topic that it's so much under-investigated, under-spoken?
Well, I think you're absolutely right. It is under-investigated and unspoken about, actually. So in my work as a Jungian analyst, I've noticed that when people talk about their family, I will ask about their father, and he's kind of a non-entity and not around very much, and everything is accepted. Well, he wasn't there, or he was there when I was little, or I saw him occasionally, or there was a very low expectation of fathers, which I think actually is to the detriment of fathers. Yeah. And I think that you're being onto the poem by Sylvia Plath. At that moment, she was quite angry at her father and at her husband. So those are the two men. But the other part is when you read her journals, quite like what I had said about people who come into my office, she was the apple of his eye when she was little, loved him, etc. And then it changes. And the absence of the father has, I think, a very strong effect on daughters, because what does that do to their own development, we could say, and their value and their worth?
Because I'll let you finish and then I'll...
No, go ahead.
I'll jump in. We have the dead mother of Andre has been, put the dead mother into the light. If we say, we should, if we use Jungian concepts of shadow and light, he brought the dead mother concept that Green explored and, made us explore in either it's in a psychoanalytical setting, in therapy, or just, thinking about it, but no father is there. And I think the father is absent. I very much, I was touched by the way you, put the concept of the presence of the absent father is more of a deal. It's not the absence. You don't lose it. And it's even, we're talking about, symbolic father. We're talking about love of a father. We're not, the actual father can be there, or he can be at work, but there is no internalized father figure or father love, maybe even. And I think that you emphasize that there is very much significance, meaning to the way that the daughter development progress through life. If she has this, this ambivalent feeling, or a concept of the absence of who was present physically. He can be there, he can be something, but he's not internalized as father's love. And what do we mean by father love? I think
I think he doesn't get internalized because his emotional presence is lacking. So Andre Green speaks a great deal about absence and lack. And this is really actually in a book, in talking about many people who have essays about him, there is one that is the dead father. So that means not necessarily the dead father, but
Yeah.
it means that the father is so much not there that, as you say, the daughter, what does she internalize? And then she could go many different ways. One is it can be very destructive to her, and the other, she could be rebellious, or she could look onto others in an idealized fashion. But how does she view herself?
Yeah.
Not idealized usually, and often she remains quite young.
She
So
remains young. It's interesting. She remains a girl.
she
It's
remains
very, very interesting because I was thinking, and you mentioned it in some interesting way. You mentioned that nowadays, okay, why now? I was asking myself, I went to look what you wrote about before. And then I saw that your last book was at something like 2012, right? If I'm correct. And then I asked myself, why now and why father? And then right away when I looked and read what you sent, you mentioned the Me Too period, and the notion, and even more than that, we know that today fathers are more present, or they're asked to be more involved, and they may be even more involved. And even in Israel we also have the law that the father can stay with the baby instead of a mother and take paternal or maternal leave. Okay, so there may be more than in the past. And I was wondering how much the actual presence now in the life of the daughter of that girl, is when she sees her husband, maybe, okay, because it's a complex issue, because if she chooses a man to be her husband that has a lot of what happened with her internal father figure, or internal absent father figure, so I don't know what man would she choose. But if she chooses the man to be her husband in these days, who is more present, who is more there, and even looking at the love he gives to her daughter, is that something that can awaken what she didn't have? Maybe the envy, maybe. I was thinking, why now? Because we also have to consider that we live in different days now, and fathers are more available, maybe, or we want to wish so, but also they're available. They're available now in my, as the way I see it, they're requested to present maternal love in some way. They're asked to develop emotional intelligence. The man should be more connected to her, to his anima side, and I wonder, is that a father that we are looking for who is absent? Does he have a form of a maternal, some kind of maternal form?
Well, it's complex. I think that fathers are definitely more involved in their families, but oftentimes I hear that the father helps with the children. Yes. Not the equal, we are together. It happens sometimes, but I think part of that is due to a transgenerational thing where fathers had fathers who were not present, and they had fathers who were also not present. So current fathers, we can't really expect them to make up for all the generations, and yet we can.
We
And
can.
yet we can expect them to grow and to learn and to be able to be in touch with their emotions. And if they are, then they will automatically have the instinct to care and to take care. And they won't neglect, they won't abuse, they won't be violent, they will be tender, they will be loving, and they will be encouraged to be that way. So far, even though fathers are encouraged to take care of the babies, encouraged to be home, it still is an aside.
I was always wondering. I'm coming from. Nowadays are actually finishing my family and couple psychoanalytic training, and very much like all my work, my therapeutic work, and my thought is considering the family and the parental couple. I work with the parental couple in clinic, and I started as being a child psychologist, but then very fast I turned to parents because I thought that the work should be done with the parents and not, yes, therapy with children. That's my view. And I work for like 15 years now, mainly with the parental couple. Right. And the encouragement you're talking about, they're encouraged to be, they, at least in Israel, that's the audience, that's the people I meet. And we have to take into account the Jewish population, and not only Jewish, but I work mainly with Jewish populations, so I'll relate to that. But the Jewish population, the generation also has the Holocaust in its unconscious history, transgenerational, transmission. And this is also a different topic, but it was I was astonished to see that also in Sylvia Plath's poem. It's, I might be a bit of a Jew, and it was, and I was thinking about whether the absence has something to do with the mother. Because on one, on the conscious, perspective, yes, they're encouraged to help me, right? But they also are very not so much welcomed into the, baby mother couple as we could maybe want or expect. Encouraged to be attached with the emotions. You mentioned if the men, the sons of the absent fathers of them, right, are now welcomed, or maybe should be more welcomed, but are they welcomed by the mother in the, the process of raising the child emotionally? Are the mother given the opportunity?
Well, I think what we're also talking about is this mother perhaps had an absent father. So as you said earlier, does she choose someone to be with who has absence, and that's what she has known? I also think that when I speak about the father, I sometimes speak about the father figure, because the couples of our current world are made up of many different gender types. Yeah. So that's there as well. So, and I think that we want to be a bit fluid in what is the masculine, what is the feminine. But you also mentioned, in addition, so does this mother, if she had an absent father, and who knows what traumas, because you mentioned the Holocaust, where many people have experienced war, disaster, and absence as a result of the parental figures. And it goes on through the generations. So how does she learn in her mind and in her heart to expect the coupling if it has not been modeled? And ideally, she and he, or whoever the couple is, would want to develop those qualities inside themselves, so they also have got that in the partnership. one other thing, you mentioned envy. So is it envy of the mother figure to the father figure, the father to the mother? And does the father also envy the daughter? And is that why? And does he get threatened by her growth and development and her being?
This is much connect me with what you said. They remain girls. They don't develop, in sexual way. So maybe in order to stay daughters and not to become a sexual object, because that's the anxiety, and the fantasy is all about, Yes. And then that might explain very much the need to remain a girl and
Yes,
not a woman.
What happens then is, and in Jungian psychology, it would be the puella. So she remains young, but also sometimes she remains young because the father, in being absent emotionally, is also violent and is not correctly dealing with her and her growth. So she's having to struggle. Should I really grow up? Should I surpass the father? Should I go beyond? And there's a conflict set up inside that the father also might be threatened again by the daughter's achievements, accomplishments.
And the husband, and future might be husband. There's a future fantasy also maybe that he's very much threatened by, in some way or another, because we're talking internal life and internal fantasy. And what I could see, and you mentioned that in her diaries, what Sylvia shows is a loving father, or a perception of a loving father, and then it changed. Okay, so something had happened, and it's really, it's obvious in the poem, and the poem shows the ambivalence. I think the most, touching part is the ambivalence through all of it, and she she kills him, and then it's not over yet, and it's not over yet, and then I'm done, and I'm through with it. And that's just, wishful thinking, because I don't think that we ever through with it completely, or can be. And I'm thinking about the Me Too motion, and Me Too motion talking about, sexual harassment. Okay, but it talks very, very specifically, and it's very explicit, and very, very, out there, that we're talking about a man being cruel, or being, violent, to sexually violent, or using the power of the animus,
Yes.
in order to suppress women. We're not talking about sexual harassment in general. We're talking about a father and a daughter. If we say, a figure who is usually, a boss, or a commander in army, or, older man, and a younger woman, that doesn't matter what age she is. So
it also happens in all cultures. I think it's quite interesting that if we kind of peel it away, it's really a cross-cultural kind of occurrence. And the Me Too movement, actually a friend of mine mentioned that in relation to the absent father. And we could also think, do the women that are sadly overtaken by these bosses or powerful figures, what was their father like? And did they learn to have to be coy, or have to go along and not be powerful? Because the powerful daughter, or the powerful woman, is called by disparaging names, oftentimes. And how does she learn to have her strength and her solidity, her intelligence,
and
throughout
woman and remain a woman, and be perceived as a woman, and not because you're absolutely right. When we hear about strong woman, it automatically makes in a vision of a cultural vision, a much broader concept, she's more like a man. Okay, or we have to, or all the motion, the feminist motion. Okay, so we have to take the roles and form that man has the right to, right, and we have to become, okay, more of a man. I grew in Ukraine, and one of the things that I remember, and when I started, my family and psychoanalytic training, that's the first thing I was thinking about, is that in Ukraine, in Russia, when I was born, the dolls that we had dolls, right? But they were not sexually gendered toys. They had no gender. They were a figure. It was not a man or woman. And, thinking about that, what do we have to be without the, gender or sexual identity of us?
Well, that's interesting, because I think that people now will give little boys and little girls a variety of toys. And so I think that helps, for sure. But I also think that, quite sadly, women learn very early to be less than who they really are. And so, is that because they do not have good models with the father? And does the mother have an absent masculine, absent father in her mind? And does she also pass that on to the daughter? And is it possible to be whatever feminine is and be as creative, strong, out there, edgy, and different all one's life? There is one other thing which is part of this, I think, as well, that when you said about Sylvia Plath, in her journals, because she killed herself at the age of 30, there is repeated over and over this deal of not wanting to get old. So is that also something which the father prefers the little girl? If she gets old, where is the, whatever old is, where's the modeling for the development throughout her entire life and the encouragement for that?
Yeah, it's very interesting because, I hear you talking about, that women, mothers, and future mothers, women, girls are not modeled to be, maybe have less model, and maybe are not using all they can use potentially in order to become a whole person and develop the, person with connected to both her anima and animus parts and being integrated within it and live, a full internal, mental life as much as we can. But you're talking about the need to do that by bringing back the father, by bringing it back, because you put the father, you make it, again, theoretically, okay, in writings. We don't have fathers almost nowhere, On the other hand, Young, if I'm correct, because I don't know much, but from what I know, I don't remember any little boy archetype in Young's writings, and he has pleura. You know what I mean? Like, he has a little girl.
Actually, no. If you read Jung's collected works, there is no word puella in the collected works. There is a little boy called the puer. And Jung himself wrote one essay from his many, many writings on the father. Now, he talked about the father archetype, he talked about the father complex, and the mother complex. But considering the fact that he had 4 daughters, he never wrote about that at all. So it's really, but also the time was different, the country was different, the world was different. But could you also say that all those psychoanalytic fathers, who were their fathers?
Exactly.
And is that why they left it out? Because they didn't have fathers either. So they maybe had to take over something, create something, but what could they give to their daughters?
You know what the psychoanalytical concept of a father took me to to the psychoanalytical father Jung had in his relationship with Freud.
Right.
Freud has not, he loved him until he became older, or until he became with his self, which was different from what Freud could contain. And I was thinking if that has something to do with all that in relation to the effect of a father, because more was written on the effect of lack of a father or loss of a father or dead father onto boys, okay, on their boys, on their children. Less of nothing, almost as you said, except Green's mention, but if we take it, nothing much was written about the absence of a father and its effect on a daughter. So it's
so exactly. But what we're both saying is the transgenerational passage of the absence. What it sets up as well, and you mentioned it earlier, is the ambivalence and the desire and the wounding. So the desire always remains, because it's like we're born with a desire for parental guidance. So it's always there. What does she do with that desire? Does she develop it? If she develops it, she goes into the wound. And that actually helps her own development, but you've got to go into the wound.
Yeah, but what of course happens, we know what happens is if the desire has no figure at all, like the preconception, it remains empty. Then what it actually goes, it's to suppression. It's not there, and then we remain the little girls. We remain girls because maybe also we don't have, we cannot allow the desire anymore because it's too painful not to have it fulfilled in some way because of the absence.
Exactly. And maybe that's why people go into therapy with a man or a woman, because the woman can be the father figure for whoever comes to her, depending on the personality and the connection. And therefore, the desire can help get into the wound and help. I don't know if it gets completely healed, but becomes conscious. And I think that's why I wrote this, is for consciousness and an awareness. Wait a second, what have we really been missing? And let's name it and call it as it is, as bad as it is, and the possibilities that are there as well. Yeah. Because there's a lot of possibilities and room for growth because of all the lack.
Of the lack, and also, as opposed to many writers who's exploring loss, you're exploring absence, presence of an absence. And I think it's quite different, relation to psychic world. It's not a loss, psychic loss. It's an absence, which, in my view, when I read it, it takes me to something that always there with me. It's not a loss that I can mourn even. The loss, we can go through mourning. And the absence is always in some way lived within us, unexplored, right? Like if that's, I think, what you're saying. Let's explore it, let's touch it. And it's painful and it hurts, but let's touch it. Let's us not being afraid, to become familiar what's happening within us.
I agree with you. I think it's also more differently complex than when you mourn something that you have had. On the other hand, if it's within us, it's accessible, but we have to work to find it. And that work actually develops the strength of being a person. So the absence actually carries a great deal of creativity, because how each of us will fill it will be different. And who knows where it will take us. So although absence, it feels like an abyss at times, it actually is something that carries a tremendous amount of potential.
And hope.
And hope, exactly.
With all the, with all that pain. But also, I think through the exploration, because I think that the now generation, men and women, are going through some very, very confusing stage of development, psychic development, because women today don't, in my view, like if I see it, from the outside and reflect, and I see, like, I feel that women do not know what they want anymore. You know what I mean? Because on one hand, they're so confused that it really, we can look at it on a cultural lens, and we see that it's a massive change that so far has not found its place. You know what I mean? Because women do not know what they want. They want the man who will be very, gentle and very attached to his, anima side. And then, and if he, presents some potentially more masculine traits, then he might be too much of a masculine, right? But also they don't want to lose that masculine form, because when I hear more and more young women here in Israel, at least, because that's who I meet, but I know it's not only Israeli, who say, well, we don't feel men around anymore. All men start acting more like women, because, and then men said, well, we're afraid because of all the, situation and, a feeling in the air of Me Too, kind of, because if we be us and will present our, sexually masculine form in some way, we might be perceived as attacking. It's very confusing because the women also don't find their place, right? And I think that has a lot to do with unexplored, parts of what you suggest to explore now. I think that what we do, we can become a more, a less confusing society.
I think you're right. I think what can really happen is if people can see the traits of whatever masculine or feminine is in the other, and take them into themselves and be able to communicate back and forth, then whoever the masculine side, whatever that is, inner and outer, has a chance to grow and develop. Therefore, and as well, so does the feminine side. So they both can develop, and it will challenge all sides. It challenges them to be their complete selves, not their partial selves, and to be able to be honest with each other, deal with each other straight, and no matter what one believes or your analytical background, the point is to be able to communicate with the other and allow for the differences that challenge, so it will challenge oneself and oneself will challenge them. I think sometimes people back off from the challenge because it hits into ambivalence, desire. I want so-and-so to be the father figure. No, that's not going to work.
Yeah.
You have to do it yourself.
You have to back into, and I completely agree with you that it doesn't matter what, the theoretical background of a therapist. If we look at the couple, the parental couple, if they don't do the couple work in which each takes back the parts he was, projecting onto the other and then has conflicts with it, back to itself, then the parental couple would only, present what he is upon the daughter and the son, okay? And then the transgenerational transmission continues. So I think that your suggestion is much more than just, getting to know ourselves. I think that can bring a lot of what we need in order to next generation to grow with maybe new conflicts, okay, and different conflicts, but not the ones that we're actually transmitting onto them, because we don't know those parts of ourselves and which parts are and how much they're influencing us. So I think that it's a great contribution to bring that that topic, the notion, into our conscious, in order we can hopefully start dealing with it, all of us.
I agree with you. In Jung uses oftentimes the words the personal unconscious and the collective unconscious. And both of them are places where we can develop out of the absence in both places. And there is also something about the culture that we each are in, the time we were raised, the era we're born to, where we have possibilities and also limits. The limits are where the next generation will hopefully be able to develop. But if the parental couple are absent and there's that absent father, then where does the daughter or the son, they get in the middle, and what do they find? Absence. And that from that, hopefully they'll develop. But it means they're going to have to do the work.
Yeah, and then they'll have to do the therapeutic work of bringing it back. So yeah, I always said, that's why I started working with parents, because they're transmitting into the next generation. And instead of seeing the therapist when the child is 30 or 40, that we can do the work now. And I think that's right. I can relate to that suggestion presented by your book. So your book is coming out next month by Routledge Publishing, right? Yes. And people can buy it on Amazon as well, or
Amazon. They can buy it from Routledge, Barnes and Noble. There are many places they can buy it: ebook, paperback, hardback.
The outcoming.
Pardon me?
What date is it going to be out?
Yes, November 30th. So just next month.
Wow, that's great. So hopefully the new creation, because it's also a very creation, and where I'm just being part and feeling lucky to be part of the delivery. The last just before it's out. Has I think it's a great contribution to many, both therapeutic but not only, because therapeutic, I can see as therapists how much work can be done out of what you're suggesting, but I think it's way more than that, not just for therapeutic qualities, and processes.
No, it's not only for therapists, it's actually for people who are interested. But the other thing that you say, when you mention about when the book will come out, it's another example out of absence, and out of recognizing absence comes something. So the lack to not get filled, but to make a contribution.
make a meaning. Maybe I see it as like, making a meaning out of the absence.
That's right.
Because
That's right.
and I think that's the best way to present what you say. The book that's been created and born, but out of touching the painful absence topic, and
It will
create something new, something developing, and something that will help develop the next generations. And I think it's beautiful.
Yes, I would say as well, in addition to what you're saying, does anything develop without wounding and desire and absence and lack? It usually doesn't. It needs all of those ingredients to be able to develop.
We need some distractions in order to build something new. So, and as much as we don't like to think about it, it's on every levels. And sometimes the couple that is in great misery and great conflict, they come to therapy and then they start growing. So we see that conflict as something that otherwise they'll remain on some maybe lower level of development, both as a couple and as an individuals. So I think I can very much relate to the desire and the pain and the loss and the lack, but only by mourning and touching those wounds, because otherwise it stays destructive and it stays disturbing and destroying us and destroying the other if we don't. It's still there, but if we don't touch it, it will destroy us. And if we touch it,
I think you're right. Yes, and I would just go back and add, then we are not healing the transgenerational issues. And one other thing to add, that it's not just emotionally, it's also in our bodies, that the absence of the father is felt. So
I would much like to ask you to do another talk about that part, because we don't have much time, and I think that has we have to take another hour just talking about that, because this is important, because this is also has much to do with trauma and what we have on an actual level as well, and it's embodied losses and embodied absence and the relation with our bodies. So if you have time, I'll be happy to do that conversation and giving sexuality and body and embodiment a greater time, and not just a couple of minutes, in order not to symbolize the meaning it has. I think we need to spend more time on it, to giving presence on a higher level to that topic.
Yes, well, we don't get anywhere without our bodies. So it's also our psyche, but it's connected to our bodies. So they're all a part of it.
Exactly. Yeah, but it's still, I think it has much more meaning that we can give it now. So I'll be happy if you find more time to talk about that. I had so many more questions, and I'm really anticipating to read the book. And I think that you took a responsible role by writing it. I think it's, in my view, it's a role of responsibility to next generation, some part of a parental role for next generations, by giving this topic a space, presence, and so much relation. So thank you for that. I think has more meaning than we can think about.
Well, thank you very much. And thank you for honoring the absence of the father.
Yeah. Thank you so much for being here. I'm waiting to read the book, and I think that many more now. And it's not easy, but it's so meaningful that we all have to reflect and think. And I think that book is a very good start to a change that we all, for years now, have been looking for. Thank you very much, Susan. And thank you for being here, and thank you for giving me the honor to hosting you. And I'll after I read the book, then we'll meet, we'll meet again.
Do that. We will do that. But thank you also for giving me the honor. I appreciate it.
Much. Thank you. See you later.
Thank
Bye-bye.
you. Bye.
Bye-bye.